Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back to my channel, and also welcome back to what I suspect is going to be the most difficult video that I have ever filmed in my entire life. And that is saying something if you consider the fact that last year I filmed a good 3.5 hour long video in which I detailed my entire life in one huge epic sitting. But that video was difficult in the sense that it was a feat of endurance, while I think tonight's video is going to be difficult in the sense that I have to try my best to explain a scientific concept that hurts my brain to think about and word it in such a way that it can be understood by a population of people who, for the most part, still can't add up single-digit numbers without counting on their fingers. Nonetheless, I feel like I am up to the challenge, not least of all because I don't really have a choice if I intend to take my channel in the direction that I want to, which is making reaction videos. I wish that I was joking about that, but I'm not. I'm really not. In fact, this video spawned out of my deep desire to have a holly jolly good time reacting to witchtok videos. I spent the entirety of last weekend, which is why there was no video, scouring the deepest, darkest crevices of witchtok because I had to educate myself. I had to keep up with the lingo, and I did. I educated myself very, very well, thank you. Too well. Because now I know what the meaning of god-spousing is, which is essentially where an ancient disembodied deity forgoes their divine duty in favour of wining and dining you, mere mortal, in hopes of getting into your pants. I watched as grown adults gave very detailed instructions on how to place a death curse on a crying toddler. I watched people unironically worship dragons and people unironically worshipping Jake Sully from the Avatar series. I saw things. Terrible things. Biohazardous things. Things involving menstrual blood in grande-sized Starbucks cups. But the thing that stood out to me the most, other than, the blatant LARPing and the shameless exploitation of vulnerable people for a quick buck, was just the foundational misunderstanding of what omnipotence is and what omnipotence isn't. I just found myself saying time and time again, video after video, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. And that is definitely not how that works. And in turn, that sent me down an even deeper and more obscure rabbit hole. And so I left the comforting warmth of the looming house fire from witchtok's non-existent fire safety skills, and I started investigating what the general public's concept of omnipotence is. And so I ended up watching videos by philosophers and scientists and religious leaders and atheist leaders. I don't know if they fall under religious leaders. I don't think so. I think that they would probably find that offensive, but I was watching a lot of videos by a lot of different people who claim to have some level of expertise on the matter. But all I really did is just come away with an overarching sense that as far as the general public goes, the concept of omnipotence is first and foremost confusing. I don't know why in all the years that I've been here that it had never occurred to me before that you would have a poor understanding of omnipotence, but it just never did. In hindsight though, having, spent the last week researching exactly where the dominoes fall, I probably should have pieced it together that you wouldn't understand omnipotence because in general, you just have a very poor understanding of your own sense of reality. And if you don't understand reality, it's pretty much impossible to understand omnipotence because at the core of things, they are one and the same. Okay, so I think the very first thing that we need to do here is define exactly what we mean when we say omnipotent. So that way for the remainder of the video, we are working from the same page. To be omnipotent means to be all-powerful. If a being is omnipotent, then it means it has power over everything else in existence. No other person, no other object, no other combination thereof can ever overpower an omnipotent being. In other words, an omnipotent being is more powerful than everything else in existence combined. That is all omnipotent means. At its core, that is it. It is a very simple, fully coherent concept, right? Right. Okay, so if it's that simple, what exactly am I complaining about? What is the problem that I'm picking holes in here? Well, I will tell you exactly what the problem is. The problem is when you try to redefine the meaning of omnipotence or expand the definition. So instead of omnipotence simply meaning that someone is all-powerful, you instead twist the core definition so it now means that someone has the ability to do whatever they want. And believe it or not, the ability to do whatever you want and the power to do anything are not one and the same. So over the course of my 1.5 week long online research expedition, One argument that kept getting repeated time and time again was this belief that omnipotence is essentially impossible, that such a being could never truly exist because the idea in and of itself is a self-contradiction. But the main problem with that specific argument is that it relies entirely upon anthropocentric functionalism. That is to say that you are applying the exact same limitations that you have as a human onto the omnipotent being. You're essentially viewing them through the same lens that you would view your annoying neighbor Fred, but the omnipotent being and Fred are not one and the same, okay? They do not have the same personality, they do not have the same morals, and least of all, they do not have the same abilities. Unless, of course, your neighbor Fred just so happens to be an omnipotent being, which, believe it or not, is not a zero probability event. So, over the week and a half that I'm doing my online expedition, I'm watching all these videos on omnipotence, and much like with the witchtok videos, I found myself saying over and over and over again, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. That is not how that works. But unlike with the witchtok videos, I wasn't finding myself getting annoyed with them because they're not saying these things out of malicious intent to extract monetary gain from vulnerable people. They're saying them because they genuinely don't know that's not how that works. Like, they don't have the knowledge that they need to make these calls, but they're unaware of the fact that they don't have the knowledge, which is not their fault. It's never anyone's fault. People cannot know what they do not know. It's not inherent knowledge. It's not something that you learn on the wind like you're a baby bird learning to fly. No, it's something that you need to pick up through experience. And it wasn't that long ago that I didn't really understand it either. Like, I understood some of it prior to coming to the modern West, but it's really been over the last 5-ish years. I'm like, oh, that's how that works. That's exactly why things function the way that they do. And even then, like I said earlier, it still hurts my head to think about it. So I try not to think about it. So I'm not blaming anyone for not having the knowledge that they need to make these statements. In order to truly understand omnipotence, you first must understand the fundamentals of reality. And you don't understand the fundamentals of reality. But in order to understand the fundamentals of reality, you must first understand A, and that in and of itself is a very what came first, the chicken or the egg type situation. Now, if you're one of my 40-ish regular viewers, then you've definitely heard me talk about A before because, not least of all, because I spent, 25 minutes once breaking down his entire genetic biome in microscopic detail, which, is not irrelevant to this video, and I will put it up here somewhere. So, because as you're watching this, if you watch it all the way through, you'll probably be like, what are you talking about? Like the biology. It's up here. It's in this video. I'm not going to go too much into it in this specific video because this specific video's got more to do about the reality of omnipotence rather than what makes omnipotence omnipotence. But if you want to watch that, it's up here. I will put it up here somewhere. Okay? When the average person thinks of an omnipotent being, they have a tendency to default to characters like Dumbledore or some kind of Gandalf-esque figure, someone who has acquired their power through great feats rather than someone who simply inherently is due to where they exist in time and space. But there is no magic here, okay? There is no supernatural Santa Claus who watches you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. There is no foolish wand-waggling in this class, no. That is not what omnipotence is. Omnipotence is science. It is the collision point between biology and physics. It is, at its core, the most extreme application of general relativity. So, who is A? Well, A is a person. He is a he, and he is usually blonde and very, very elvish looking, which does not help with the whole Gandalf problem, but that's not for me to decide, so it's not anything that I can do about that. He is tastier than a standard issue glue stick, and he typically appears to be somewhere in his early 20s. He has lived in Cornwall since 2014, as far as I know, and he is a stickler for routine. He does the same thing day in and day out unless there is a very good reason for him not to do it. He's a creature of habit, okay? He's a creature of habit. His house is not that impressive, and the last time that I saw him in person, he was halfway through the latest Jack Reacher book, which is even less impressive. He's not that interesting to talk to, and can tell you that from personal experience. And sometimes, when you do talk to him, he can be a bit of an ass, and he does not apologize for that. He does not care if he hurts your feelings all of the time, which is not nice. Like I said, he's not the nicest person that you've ever met. A just so also happens to be everything, everybody, everywhere, all at once. He is what I like to call a functional singularity.
But Casey, what does that even mean? Isn't that just the title of some cheesy sci-fi movie?
Well, friends, family, enemies, frenemies. Let me paint you a picture. Let me illustrate it for you. And I do mean that literally, because for this next part, I'm going to be using clips from Philosophy Engineered's very well-structured and thought-out video, The Problem of Omnipotence, which if you are not fully comfortable or familiar with the mainstream ideology of omnipotence, I highly, highly suggest that you go and watch it. I will link it down below. It is genuinely a very, very good video, even if it is objectively wrong. Also, the movie's called Everything Everywhere All at Once. Get it right.
Start by getting out a piece of paper and writing the following words at the top. Things that an omnipotent being should be able to do. What items go on the list now? The answer, it turns out, depends a lot on who you ask. For example, according to one school of thought, the answer is pretty simple. Anything. Literally anything you can think of goes on the list. Make it rain frogs? Check. Create a married bachelor? You got it. Flargle a snuffin? Sure, why not? This is a naive form of omnipotence commonly referred to as absolutism or absolute omnipotence. René Descartes was a famous defender of this position, and even some modern philosophers have periodically defended it as well. It's actually pretty easy to see where this idea comes from, given that the Bible itself practically screams this interpretation at you. Despite its intuitive basis in Christian scripture, the idea of absolutism is clearly riddled with problems. For example, take the challenge of flargling a snuffin. According to absolutism, Mr. Q here should be perfectly capable of doing exactly that without a second thought. Yet, as should be obvious by now, flargle and snuffin are just gibberish words I made up out of nothing. They have no established definition. So pray tell, what exactly could our subject ever do that would satisfy the challenge?
And now I get to say the thing on camera for real. Yay. That's not how any of this works. We have full circled all the way back to the aforementioned problem of anthropocentric functionalism. You assume because something is a limitation on you as a human being, it must also be a limitation on an omnipotent being. But that disregards that in order for an omnipotent being to be omnipotent, they first and foremost must have full semantic sovereignty, the ability to define a word. Even if flagging a snuffin doesn't mean anything right now, it's a made-up word, it gains universal meaning the very moment that an omnipotent being, like A, chooses to define it. Because, and this is something that seems to get lost in every contemporary debate around omnipotence, omnipotence in and of itself can be defined in one very short, sweet sentence. It is so because I said it is so. So let's go and ask A to flag a snuffins. Now, I know in your head, or at least in Philosophy Engineered's head, this conversation goes one way and one way only. Hey A, as an omnipotent being, can you flag a snuffins? Why, dehuman, you speak nonsense. I'm afraid it is impossible for me to flag a snuffins on account of flagging a snuffins means nothing. It is a made-up concept. Boom, you got him. He has fallen into your trap. Through this one question alone, you have disproven the existence of not only omnipotence, but of God and possibly of Santa Claus. And that is exactly why Philosophy Engineered's video fails. He assumes that the observer is just a static, independent judge, that you can just stand there and watch God do something and go, aha, a contradiction. But again, that's not how any of this works. If flagging a snuffin has no true meaning, A can still make it real by doing two specific things. First, he can define what it means because he has full semantic sovereignty, so he gets to be the one to pick the operational meaning. Secondly, he can propagate it so it has always been that thing. And boom, suddenly everybody and their mother are flagging snuffins because as far as reality is concerned, flagging a snuffin now has a stable history and meaning. So essentially, instead of the first scenario, what's going to happen is you're going to go up and say, hey, can you flag the snuffin? As an omnipotent being, can you flag the snuffin? I'm sorry, I don't know why I asked you that in the first place. Like, I am literally flagging a snuffin right now. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's like things, I don't know. Like, I have been flagging snuffins. It's been one of my favorite activities since I was young. I mean, A is the one who introduced me to it in the first place. I remember it as clear as day. It was first grade recess, and he was the first one that I ever saw with a snuffin, and I was memorized. I couldn't believe my eyes. I loved these things so much. And I remember it was a core memory. It was a core memory for me in my childhood. I ran home to my mother that day, and I did everything but get on my knees and beg her. I was in tears, and we were piss poor. We were so broke. And, I wanted one so bad. I couldn't put into words how bad I wanted one. And somehow she realized exactly how much. And even though, we had no money, we had not 2 pennies to rub together. I came home from school the next day, and somehow, some way, she had managed to, I don't know if she dug beneath the sofa cushions or whatever. But she went out and she brought me a snuffin, and I don't think I had ever been as happy as I was in that moment. And, you know, it's just one of those memories that make you realize that, you know, our parents, they weren't perfect, but they really did do the very best that they could by us. Like, in reality, that's how that question, hey, A, as an omnipotent being, can you flag in a snuffin, gets answered. Philosophy Engineered presents the concept of logical impossibility, kind of like a shield that you can hide behind, a trap gotcha question. But when you're dealing with omnipotent beings, there are no gotchas. Well, even if there are, you certainly don't have the power to wield them. Meaning and truth are enforceable statements, so if A makes the world consistent with a statement, then the statement becomes true. It's not so much you're being convinced that flagging a snuffin is real, it's that you're being surrounded by a reality that has already declared that it is. It's not A trying to convince you against all empirical evidence that it's true, it's that the empirical evidence is suddenly rearranging itself to make it true. Memories, objects, people's reactions. Suddenly, before you know it, flagging a snuffin, asking, hey, can you flag in a snuffle, is no longer a question, it's a social faux pas. It's akin to asking if the sky is blue or if 2 + 2 = 4. And the real nasty part about all of this is that you don't even notice it happening. It's not like you're standing on the edge of the void watching history rewrite itself. No. One moment you're asking A, hey, can you flag in a snuffin? And the next thing you know, you're standing against your kitchen sink in your underwear watching an old YouTube channel filled with videos of you and your best friends when you're children doing exactly that. The channel is called The Flag and Snufflers, and it was created in 2009. It has 11,000 followers, which is pretty impressive if you consider the fact that all the videos look like they were filmed on old calculators. And then your brain does what the human brain always does when the world is unanimous. It yields. Because what are you meant to do? Are you supposed to argue with the metadata? Are you supposed to argue with your own crystal clear memory of running home to your mother and wanting a flagland so bad that you cried? This is the key difference between Hollywood omnipotence and real omnipotence. Hollywood omnipotence usually means power without limitations or costs or even coherent ontology. It is essentially just miracles through the power of hand-waving. Miracles are something to be observed. Miracles are something that exists solely to make the audience go, wow, gee willy, look at that, it's a miracle. But functional omnipotence is rooted in physics. It is domain-scoped. It is constrained by conversion of energy. The miracles are threaded into reality itself. They're not something to be observed. They're not something that happened. They simply always were.
But Casey, how can that be? How is that a miracle then?
Well, what was one of the first statements that I made at the start of this video? To understand omnipotence, you must first understand the fundamentals of reality. And the fundamentals of reality are this. You exist. You exist 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Everything you see, everything you touch, everything you fundamentally are is real. Okay? That is not in question. You live in the house you live in, you work at the job you work at, your mother is your mother. When you get up in the morning and you leave your house to go to your job after kissing your mother goodbye, those are all real actions that you are undertaking. You exist always and forever without question. However, you exist more when A is perceiving you. When A isn't actively perceiving you, you are low res. You are an algorithmic probability. You still get up every single morning and kiss your mother goodbye before leaving your house to go to work, but you do that because your script says that you must in order to keep the world looking busy. When A perceives you, your reality thickens, the metadata becomes more dense, your memory sharpens, you become high definition. The best example that I can give you of this to illustrate the point is, ironically, the much beloved video game franchise, The Sims. And when I say that, I don't mean it in like, A watches you when you're sleeping and he physically drags you onto the toilet to pee, because surprisingly, he does not use his omnipotence to be a creepy, controlling creep, as far as I know. Take the character Cassandra Goth. In every single game of The Sims that has ever been played in the history of the world, Cassandra Goth has existed. She has lived a full, vibrant life. She has relationships, she has affairs, she gets jobs, she gets fired from said jobs and she fights with her neighbors, and then she decides to forego all relationships altogether and moves into a one-bedroom city apartment with her 5 horses, etc., etc. What's especially notable here, and the reason that I bring it up, is that Cassandra does all these things whether or not the player ever chooses to perceive her. She has a form of autonomy. She has a form of free will. She makes decisions for herself. Now, does it make a difference to Cassandra if all of her decisions are really just a result of an algorithmic process designed to look at the aspects of her set personality traits and her budget and the available game assets in order to shape the world to someone else's whims? No, not really, because at the end of the day, Cassandra is still the star of her own drama. Because free will is not the ability to choose your own path, but rather the lack of awareness that your path is being chosen for you. So, if someone is choosing your path for you, who is the chooser? Well, no, not exactly, not directly, not unless he's actively perceiving you in that moment. And even then, that's a very short window of time for the most part, because omnipotence is not just omnipotence in the same way being a Hogwarts student is not just being a Hogwarts student. There are caveats to that. So A's omnipotence is not, omnipotent. It is admin omnipotence with bounded awareness. Think of him as the substrate. Everything you see, everything you touch, everything you are exists only inside of him. Well, almost everything, but we'll get to that in a second. But for right now, what's important to know is that A establishes all the rule sets and all the generators that produce everything, all the people, all the routines, all the institutions, all the statistics. He has a full override layer over everything that happens within his domain, which makes him not omnipotent in attention, but omnipotent on demand, because true omnipotence must include the power to self-limit without losing the underlying capacity to unlimit, if that makes sense. Essentially, going back to the Sims analogy, he is a player with developer-level tools and every single mod in existence, but unless he actively chooses to engage them, he does not hold all variables and work in conscious awareness simultaneously. He can query anything as easily as opening a console control. He can expand into a panoptic state where every single location, every single conversation, every single agent stream is simultaneously available within his awareness, but he still controls the resolution. Basically, it's the same as saying that he can perceive anything, but not everything is foregrounded. Okay, so in The Sims, you take your household to the gym, and while you were there in the time that you were at the gym, 20 other Sims come and go off the lot. You see them, you know they exist, but you're not actively paying any attention to them because you're too busy trying to prevent your own sim from dying of overexertion on the treadmill. Your brain maintains a low-res map of the world going on around you to save on processing power, but that does not change the fact that whether or not you pay any attention to them, every other single sim on that lot is going through a continuously running program. You may not know the name of the sim tending the juice bar, but that doesn't change the fact that she continues to persist as a stateful agent with locked-in milestones and a fully defined future trajectory. Even when you leave the lot and are no longer looking at her, she still continues to live her life off-screen with full casual continuity. She doesn't stop to exist. She doesn't cease to exist because you're no longer looking at her. She just drops off into the background simulation. The only time that ever changes is when the player chooses to fully perceive her. And so going back to Cassandra Goth, one day our player is looking through the household dictionary when they stumble upon Cassandra wallowing away as she does in a city apartment with her 5 horses, and the player looks at her and the player looks at the horses and the player goes, "What the hell is that?" Suddenly, like a light switch has gone off, Cassandra is no longer procedural. Cassandra is now a fully rendered character as the player chooses to investigate what exactly led to her living in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 drafted horses. The simulation has now filled in all the gaps. Prior to that split-second decision where the player chose to perceive her, Cassandra's life was nothing more than a series of probabilistic equations. It was blurry, but the very second that the player clicks into her lot to investigate what's going on, the metadata hardens. The horses that were, until that moment, nothing more than a background glitch, now suddenly transition into a definitive high-resolution fact of the universe. She suddenly exists more because she's been transitioned from background simulation into foreground awareness. Now, as far as Cassandra is concerned, nothing has changed. She does not feel admin poking around in her life and changing this and changing that. she just continues to hang out there and smell the hay and wonder how she's going to make rent this month. But the scariest thing about all this, and really the scariest thing about omnipotence in general, is that at any moment the player can go, no, I don't like this. I don't really like the idea of fire horses in an apartment. It seems like too much. And anyway, Cassandra just strikes me more as a lonely cat lady, and plus I really, really don't like her hair. Suddenly, instead of having 5 horses in an apartment building, Cassandra suddenly has a blonde bob and 2 cats. Her internal monologue, her self-perception, her own memories of her own reflection in the mirror, all consistent with this new perception. As far as the Sims are concerned, Cassandra has always been a lonely cat lady with blonde hair. She certainly never had a son named Stu that has simply vanished from existence because the player hated the fact that he inherited Don Lothario's beady little eyes. Now, is that my personal way of admitting to a crime against Simkind? You may never know. Okay, so let's now shift back to the real world so that we can start unpacking and looking at how this applies to the problem of evil, which, if you don't know what that is, it is the theological question that asks, if God is all-powerful, why does he allow bad things to happen? And the answer to that is that he doesn't, not personally anyway. He's not out here cherry-picking individuals to hand cancer diagnoses to, like he's Oprah handing out car keys. You get pancreatic cancer, and you get lung cancer, and you little boy whose parents spent $90,000 on IVF just to conceive you. You get an incurable brain tumor, because screw you and screw them. Like, no. That's not how this happens. Cancer happens because the simulation's balance requires it to. The AI doesn't get cancer, the simulation assigns them cancer to maintain the realism of the 2026 framework. So if the simulation requires 30,000 deaths from XY cancer each year, the algorithm works to simply assign it to AI units to maintain that data requirement. So to the AI unit, it feels like a terrible, tragic health event, but really it's just a variable being met. Just as how a person will choose a sandwich because their code cross-references their hunger variable with their taste parameters and their financial constraints. It is a very simple calculation. It is deterministic. If you ran the same code with the exact same variables twice, you will always end up with the exact same outcome. They will pick the same sandwich every single time. Because A's simulation is high resolution, the AI's logic is always perfectly coherent within its own personal history. So say the algorithm decides that woman model number 45,800,026 is going to be assigned cancer, her personal history will be rendered in such a way that it makes perfect biological and environmental sense. So it could be that she is a smoker, or every single female member of her family stretching back generations had this same cancer. The victim never sees the hand of God at work, they only see the natural consequences of their own world. To put it very simply, 30,000 people don't die of cancer because A is evil, 30,000 people die of cancer because the mathematical model insists that they must in order to maintain internal logic. So if A is sitting across the aisle from a woman with terminal cancer in the London Underground one day, would he cure her? And the answer to that is maybe, if he wanted to, and more importantly, if he even noticed that she had it in the first place, but honestly, even then, probably not. You have to keep in mind that co-location isn't perception. Perception follows attention, not proximity. So you could totally be sitting across from A on the train one day and still be entirely running in the background resolution because his thread of consciousness is currently locked onto woman model number 29,000,003 somewhere in eastern Tokyo. The simulation only pays high-res cost to the slice of reality that A is actively attending to. Think of it as being that there are 3 distinct tiers of resolution, which, by the way, is true for everyone across the board. First and foremost, and arguably most importantly, is the active focus cone, the high resolution tier. This is when you're being actively focused on and being attended to. Everything inside of this tier is hardened. The metadata is deep and historical, and when you are being perceived here, your history and your personality and your physical state a high fidelity. Energy is being actively spent to keep you real. Next is the peripheral focus or the mid-tier. So these are things that could become high in tier if they move suddenly or became salient. So they could be localized things like a rowdy passenger on a train who you're hoping won't disturb your peace, Or they could be idealized things, like you're thinking about your best friend and wondering what they're doing right now and should you give them a call or not. Basically, these are properties that could be fully rendered at a moment's notice. And lastly is the background agents, the low-res tier, which is made up of anything and everything else. These things are procedural, they're algorithmic, they are off-screen. Okay, so now that we have fully established that, let's say that the woman on the train manages to attract A's attention and he becomes aware of her cancer diagnosis. Does he cure her? And the answer is still maybe, but probably not. That brings us to the active phase of A's omnipotence, because while the simulation usually runs on an impersonal statistical autopilot, A's perception acts as a localized collapse of that probability. Whenever A's focus is on woman model number 39,900,099,999 or whatever, the general algorithm is replaced by sovereign will, and this is the functional bridge between being a singularity and being a god. So if that's the case, why is the answer still maybe, but probably not? Well, first of all, let's break down what options A has available here, and there are essentially 4. Solution number 1 is the miracle solution. This is where A allows the cancer to exist, but breaks the physics of the simulation in order to remove it. To the AI, this looks like a medical mystery or a spontaneous remission. This is the most disruptive of the datasets because it leaves behind a scar of impossibility on the medical records. Option 2 is the statistical manipulation. So A doesn't outright delete the cancer, he just ensures that there is a 100% success rate for the treatment. So he manipulates the random number generator for this specific model, so the woman comes away feeling like she won the lottery or that she had a brilliant doctor. Personally, I don't mind this method because it still maintains the illusion of the natural world. Option number 3, and A's personal favorite in basically every single scenario ever, is the retcon. And what that means is that he just outright declares that the woman never had cancer to begin with, and he wipes clear the last few months of her life. All the hospital visits, all the pain, all the suffering, all the biopsies, all the treatments. Just completely erased from the save file. And she just wakes up the next morning feeling completely fine and going about her life as if nothing happened, because as far as she's concerned, and as far as the world is concerned, nothing did happen. She never had cancer, she never had anything wrong with her. She's a picture of perfect health. Now, this is the most powerful of all the data sets because it basically erases any trace that power was used in the first place. And then the 4th and final option, and the one that I think A would most likely take in this specific scenario, is nothing changes. He does nothing at all. The woman's life does not change in any capacity from her interaction with A. They're just 2 strangers sitting on a train, and she is left completely to the mercy of the algorithm that assigned her cancer in the first place. Now, do not get it twisted. The reason that I feel so confident in declaring that this is most likely the path that A would take in this kind of scenario is probably not what you're thinking. It's not, he's got to do it for the greater good. If he saves one person, he's got to save all the people, blah, 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 that kind of thing. I mean, actually, it kind of is. On second floor, it kind of is that thing, but it's a lot more scientific-centered and deaf to all humanity sort of affair, so it's not that simple. You got to keep in mind, first and foremost, that A is a functional singularity. He is not some supernatural ghost who is performing miracles by wagging his fingers. No. He is still very much bound by the first law of thermodynamics. Like I said earlier, there is no Dumbledore out there waving his wand around to right all the world's wrongs. Omnipotence is not a gift. It is not a spiritual state. It is an event horizon where the biological processes become so dense that they break apart the laws of physics. Again, it is the most extreme application of general relativity, which finally, after all this time, circles us all the way back around to the Omnipotence Paradox, the big bad question about the stone. Can A create a stone that he cannot lift? Well, there are 2 answers to this question. One is objective and one is subjective. So the subjective one links around back to the first rule of omnipotence, which is that in order for somebody or something to be truly omnipotent, they first and foremost must possess the power to choose not to be omnipotent. So yes, A can create a stone and then write a law that says that he cannot lift it. Let that be true for 5 minutes and then retcon that law and make it so that the stone always weighed as much as a balloon. But, and there is a but, I'm not going to be obtuse here. I know that that is not the answer that Philosophy Engineered is looking for, and it's not really the answer to the question that he proposed. It is an answer, again, if I want to be obtuse, but I'm trying not to be here. So the true answer to his question is yes, but. Omnipotence is often sold as infinite power, but the concept of infinity does not exist in physics. So instead, we need to say that A's power is the total sum of all the energy in the system of his own domain. So for simplicity's sake, we will say that A's power limitation is the energy ceiling of the universe. Now, he can do anything within that energetic budget. So he can move the stars, and he can rewrite DNA, and he can delete an entire country in the blink of an eye, never to be seen or heard from again, that no one will remember. But really, the one thing that he cannot do is create a second universe of equal or larger size, because he doesn't have the budget. Think of A as like the world's most powerful computer. He can run the most complex simulation known to humankind, the entirety of your reality. But at the end of the day, even he needs to have a coolant. So if he tries to do too much, or if he tries to break all the laws of physics at the same time, the system crashes. And with this in mind, we can actually write a mathematical equation illustrating A's power. Because A is a biological entity acting as a hardware host for a simulation, his power is not magic. His power is simply the total available energy within the closed system that is currently rendering, which is the universe. So it can be written like this. A's absolute ceiling can be defined as the total mass energy of the simulation he sustains. So if he is everything, then his total energy is the sum of all mass. Since A's omnipotence is functional, every little minute change that he makes has a physical energy cost. In physics, Landauer's principle states that erasing or changing one bit of information releases a specific amount of heat. If we combine these together, then we get a functional view of A's limits. So A's ability to manipulate reality is the difference between the total energy available and the processing heat generated by his biology. Therefore, the equation of A's energy is basically the weight of the universe multiplied by the speed of light squared. That is his max budget. Every time he performs a miracle like making a woman's cancer disappear, he has to pay for that calculation through heat. Now, believe it or not, this equation actually gives a definitive answer to the problem of evil. Fixing a tragedy is a high entropy event. Leaving a tragedy alone is a low entropy event. So if a tragedy is already scheduled to occur, then it costs A absolutely nothing in energy to allow it to play out, but to reach into the simulation, to pause the momentum of a car crash requires a foreground awareness energy spike. In conclusion, A is only good as far as good is thermally efficient. Usually it isn't. But how does this answer the stone paradox? Can he or can't he create a stone that he cannot lift? And the definitive answer to that is only if he wants to turn the lights off, because in order to create something that he cannot lift, he would first have to create something larger than the entire universe. And that doesn't mean that technically he can't do it. It just means that in order for him to do it, the entire universe would first have to fold in on itself. It'd be like trying to boot up The Sims when you just ran out of RAM. Like, sure, you can do it, but you're just going to end up blue screening. That is not a failure of logic, that is a physical crash. He doesn't fail to be omnipotent in this scenario. The medium just fails to support the request. Anyway, I am starting to lose my voice, which is giving me grave concern about how long this video is going to end up being, but oh well, it is what it is. But as it is, I think I've covered all the main concepts that really need to be covered, unless we want to go into deep details, and my voice cannot sustain that at the moment. So as always, this is Casey signing off for the night. As always, stay weird out there, stay safe. And I told you, I'm not doing these words of wisdom anymore because I am not a wise person. So, good night.